Well, there you go. That was Tom Vilsack, the new Agriculture Secretary in the United States, talking to Mark. And Mark, with his great predictive powers, said that we were going to be talking to Frans Timmermans, the Vice President of the EU Commission, and to Agnes Kalibata, who is the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy, preparing for the upcoming Food Systems Summit. He was so very right, because we're going to talk to them both right now. So well done, Mark, and well done us for getting two fantastic speakers to close out the discussions at FFA 2021. So without further ado, let me welcome both Agnes Kalibata, who's joining us from Nairobi, and Frans Timmermans, who's joining us from Brussels. Very warm welcome to both of you to this last session of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. Agnes Kalibata, I'm going to start with you. I know you haven't had the opportunity to listen to all of our discussion today, but we just had a fascinating discussion with Dr. David Nabarro, the UN Special World Health Organization Special Envoy with responsibility for dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. And we were talking about the degree to which the world is having to run on different tracks right now. Of course, everybody concerned with dealing with the pandemic, but you particularly concerned about preparations for this very important upcoming food summit. Do you fear that the pandemic has derailed the food summit in some ways or not?
No, thank you. Thank you for that question. I actually don't think the COVID-19 has derailed the summit. I actually believe that the COVID-19 has put some wind in our sail. And I'm going to qualify that. First of all, having this meeting with you all and having this conversation around our food systems and the opportunity that our food system offers is huge. We've been talking about many things that are happening around food, the issues of hunger, the issues of nutrition. What COVID-19 has done is to highlight many of the vulnerabilities in our food system. The number of people that are hungry have increased. The number of people that are not able to have the right nutrition on their tables have increased. The impact is even more on women and children. And our economies have suffered from the impact of COVID-19. But also, we know that there's a huge relationship between COVID-19 and what's happening in our environment. So when we started the Food System Summit conversation at the beginning of 2020, there was very little interest, I must say, around nearly everybody I turned to trying to galvanize energy around the Food System Summit. But today, it's a different story. Everybody does understand what is at stake. Everybody does understand that what's happening in one part of the world does impact many of us in other parts of the world. I joined the Food System Summit because I was interested in dealing with the climate change issues that is happening in my part of the world, recognizing fully well that fixing the food system is part of fixing climate change. So really, like I said at the beginning, the Food System Summit is an opportunity that we must rally behind. And much as COVID-19 is regrettable, but it has helped us see many of the things that are not satisfactory in our food system and many of the things that we need to start paying attention to.
Right, Agnes, thanks for that. And I'm going to ask you now to speak direct to Frans Timmermans, because the two of you are on screens and Frans is right next to you, Agnes. You don't need me as the middleman. You can talk direct to a very important man in Europe, the Vice President of the EU Commission, and you can tell him exactly what you need to hear, not just in terms of fancy rhetoric, nice words, but also commitment to action to make sure that this Food System Summit really delivers, and delivers particularly for people in poorer parts of the world, including your own part of the world in sub-Saharan Africa. So you go ahead, you tell him exactly what you need to hear in terms of concrete commitment.
So thank you for that opportunity, and thank you for putting him on spot. Not me, you're not putting me on spot. So listen, the Food System Summit does offer an opportunity as well. First of all, the biggest opportunity it gives us is to come together as we are talking today. The second other biggest opportunity is to recognize some of the things we've failed and not been able to come through on. We've signed up on the SDGs on dealing with the issue of hunger, for example, on dealing with all these other challenges I talked about, but we are behind. We are not only behind, we've retrogressed in many places. And yet, we know that in many places where these challenges are happening, Mr. Vice President, the issue of multilateralism has always been our savior, our way of dealing and supporting countries. We also know that countries that have these very challenges have been put years behind by COVID-19. And we also know that they are dealing with debt challenges. And this is not the time to start, wondering and really saying, no, you guys are not paying up. No, this is the time to come through for mankind. So he asked me to address this question to you. The EU is in a very good position. You have countries that have come together to help you solve challenges, lots of challenges as individual countries. You've managed that. So the opportunity here is to come through for the EU in many places, because again, like I said, none of us is safe until many of us and all of us are safe, as we've seen with COVID. But in this case, there are other people that need the EU to step forward too and step up too. Part of what we'll be looking for from a food systems perspective is investments to end hunger, is investments to deal with malnutrition, is investments to deal with the issues of reducing emissions from climate change, part of which the food system is part of it. Part of it is dealing with what Europe can do, and you have very good examples. You've already set up good examples which are very European facing, the Green Deal, the Farm to Fork deal, but we also want those to work for the rest of the world. We also want those examples to be part of how we work together. So really, again, having been given this opportunity, for me, the question that I will ask you as you go into some of the questions you're going to address is, how will we address the issue of dealing with hunger? How will we address the issue of coming through on lots and lots and lots of challenges on nutrition given COVID-19, and given the fact that the people that are suffering the most don't have the ability to deal with it, even from a state action perspective.
All right. Well, Agnes, thank you very much. Frans Timmermans, I'm sure you could hear all of that. I guess the simple message is, EU, do not be inward looking. Don't be preoccupied and obsessed with your common agricultural policy and your subsidies and your protections. Please look outward. Consider the needs of the hundreds of millions of people who are still going hungry in this world, and use the EU's power and clout to do something about that. Can you?
Well, I hope we can. I hope we can. We have several issues we need to address. First of all, the climate crisis needs to be addressed with great urgency. Secondly, the threat of ecocide needs to be addressed with huge urgency. And thirdly, we need also to inform our citizens in Europe so that they change their consumption patterns, because that has a huge influence also on our agricultural systems, on our food systems. But the question was more specifically what we do internationally. First of all, I believe the contribution the developed world, the industrialized world, the world that is responsible for the climate change we're in now, should do is come through on the money promised for adaptation and mitigation to developing countries, because much of the many of the measures that are needed to save the production of food in the developing world to address the issue of hunger are linked to addressing the consequences of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. So first of all, make sure we invest enough to help developing countries adapt to the climate change that has already occurred. And secondly, make sure we have enough technology transfers to allow agricultural systems in developing countries to profit from the same technological breakthroughs we're seeing in the richer parts of the globe. So precision agriculture, the reduction of the use of pesticides, the reduction of the use of fertilizers, trying to avoid the use of so much medication in animal husbandry, profiting from the best possible logistic system so that you can get the food to where it needs to be, addressing issues such as the locust plagues that we've seen especially in Eastern Africa. So there are many things, sharing technology, making investment possible. There is a huge interest in investment in food systems, also in the industrializing world. Create the right conditions for investment is also extremely important. I have a number of cases, concrete cases I know of, for instance, in Ethiopia, where there's a huge knowledge-based sustainable agriculture being developed. And there's a huge interest from the outside world to be part of that development through investment. But there's also a bit of anxiety whether that investment will be safe, whether the conditions are right to do that. So that's what we can work on. So the investment climate is part of the solution to create more sustainable food systems in the developing world. So I've given you a couple of examples, but I think the main issue we need to address as humanity as a whole is how we feed 10 billion people in the future and still stay within the boundaries set by our planet. And we haven't cracked that nut yet. We need to work hard on that. And I hope in the food systems renewal we can look for solutions to address this issue.
And I don't think anybody would pretend that that is not an enormous challenge, because it very clearly is. But I want to just discuss a few specific things with you that have come out of the forum today. One specific proposal was that food in the future needs to be properly priced, and the carbon and the greenhouse gas emissions within food production have to be priced in. And that is going to mean some foodstuffs become much more expensive. And frankly, that is going to impact much more upon the poorer parts of the world than the richer, where we can probably sustain those price increases fairly easily within our economies, whereas in the developing economies, that's going to be much more difficult. And therefore, there will need to be help from rich world to developing world to allow for a more realistic and sustainable pricing of food to take into account the carbon and emissions cost of that food. Is the rich world prepared to pay and to participate in that, Franz?
Well, I'm not sure in the long run you would have a price increase for more sustainable food production. I think you could reverse that argument and say, if we don't go to a sustainable food production, there will be such shortages because of the accelerated climate change that the prices will be much higher, and then the accessibility of food where you need it will be much lower. I think that risk is much bigger than the added cost, the potential added cost of producing food in a sustainable way. And if we are successful in technology transfers, then the added cost could be a lot lower, or perhaps even zero, as compared to continuing on the same paths we're on now. So I think if you compare costs, you also have to compare the cost of non-action. And I think the cost of non-action is completely underestimated. If we see what the consequences are already now with 1 degree increase of temperature for agriculture worldwide, droughts, unpredictable weather patterns, seasons that are no longer predictable, etc. And if you compare that to the consequences if you have 3 or 4 degrees increase of temperature, the cost is astronomical, and the most vulnerable people will suffer. Like in the pandemic, you see, it's always the poorest people who suffer most. So we need to prevent that. And one element that I think should come into this is we need to really look at international trade in this context to make sure that whatever we do does not increase the price of food worldwide. And if the price of food would increase, then you need to have adaptations in the fiscal policy so that it doesn't affect the poorest part of the population. This is something we will have to address in the EU, but as I also think worldwide. We have the potential to produce enough food, even for 10 billion people within planetary boundaries, but it will need a fundamental and systemic change of the way we produce food.
Agnes, I want to bring the conversation back to you, and I want to think about not just what governments need to do and what the big corporates and private sector business needs to do, but also what all of us as citizens and consumers need to do. From the perspective you have as a former minister in the Rwandan government and somebody who cares a great deal about sustainable agriculture in Africa, does there need to be a lot of work on the part of everybody to change patterns of consumption, to get messages across about nutritious, healthy food and what people should be looking to eat? How is that going to play out in Africa, for example?
No, thank you. You know, when you look, maybe let me just take one moment also to talk about the pricing of food that you talked about earlier. I do agree with what the Vice President is saying, but I also want to bring to your attention that the fair pricing of food will include things like the cost of subsidies and the fact that some of these countries don't have access to those subsidies. So those are some of the things that we are not talking about that would probably make food would still make food comparable across the world and the opportunities for markets comparable. But to go back to the question you're asking, the consumer is a god in this whole food system perspective and really determines a lot of things. I always give the example of an avocado from Africa that comes at size 22. Size 22 avocado means that you've rejected 90% of the avocados that are produced on a farm, right? To be able to feed a consumer in Europe. And with all the footprint that is associated with getting that size 22 to Europe. So there's real room here to educate the consumer that every time you take a meal, every meal that you're taking, every composition of your meal does have a cost to the environment. So that's why the Food System Summit has designed its engagement around reaching billions of people. You know, we started out talking about, can we reach 5 billion people? Because it's about influencing our consciousness and the type of decisions we make around food and how it impacts eventually the food industry and the food market. So the opportunity is huge, and the national dialogues that David leads now are really about helping countries understand that food is also local, right? Food is local, food is culture, food is so many things. And in that local context, it means so many different things to different people, including at community level. And we need to give these people a chance, first of all, to understand what is at stake here. Number two, to tell us how they deal with these challenges in their local context. During this Food System Summit, I've come to understand that there are no better people that are protecting the environment and better custodians of the environment, for example, than indigenous people, because it means everything to them. And they're custodians, and we never ever give them the amount of credit that we should be giving them when it comes to how much they keep our environment together. But they are also challenged, especially during climate change, as the Vice President is saying. They are challenged in the sense that they can't handle some of the challenges that are thrown their way. They don't even understand how these challenges are happening. So I would say the number one priority here is to give people a chance to express themselves, to talk about what they are seeing, but also to give them a chance to be part of the solutions that we have. And I think the Food System Summit does provide a huge opportunity. I want to make sure that I would like to see that by the time of the Food System Summit and when it is done, that each of us, you know, the way you wake up in the morning and you feel you must switch off your light, the way you go to brush and you turn off the tap when it is running as you're brushing, that's how we all think about our food system. And understanding that each of the actions we take actually impacts not just the food, but how the food is produced, the land that is producing it, the trees and wherever that are cut to make sure that that food gets on our table. So let's do the education. I think for me, the engagement and the education is extremely important, and that's how we've designed the Food System Summit.
Yeah, that's very interesting, the degree to which your big ambition is to engage billions of people with this summit. We will be watching, Agnes, to see if you succeed. I just want to, I don't know if both of you were able to hear the words of Tom Vilsack, the new US Secretary of Agriculture, who was speaking just before you two came on, or just half an hour or so ago. He sounded very confident, as politicians often do, that he could sort of deliver everything. He said, you know what, we can make sure that American agriculture is net zero in terms of emissions by 2050, and continue to ramp up our efficiency and production. I just wonder whether, you know, if one thinks of American agriculture and the degree to which there's sort of industrialized meat production, there's a sort of form of monoculture in the Great Plains with their wheat production. Is somebody kidding here? I mean, you know, it's very hard to believe that that style of agriculture is going to be net zero anytime soon. And I just wonder whether all of you who are ultimately politicians are being straight with people about how difficult this is going to be in the coming years. Franz, you take that.
Well, I think I very much agree with Dr. Kalibata when she says that this is so much linked to our to our perception of who we are, more than any other production, more than any part of industry. And whatever we do, it should be linked to the local perception of what food means to people. But answering your question, I don't really think the carbon footprint of agriculture is the biggest problem. We're talking about 10% of emissions. You have, of course, a problem in huge beef production, for instance, in terms of footprint. But there are issues that can be addressed. I think the much bigger issue is the loss of biodiversity. We could lose 1 million species if we continue to produce the way we're producing now. And agriculture has a huge impact on that. And especially the use of fertilizers and pesticides and medication in animal husbandry. And that, I believe, needs to change. Now, if we move towards a more ecologically sound agriculture, we will need a lot of space for that. But we'll also need to combine it with the necessity to be custodians of the natural environment. So we will have to move towards an agriculture that is, at least in the Western world, much less intensive than it is now, because it's the intensity of agriculture that poses much of the threat to biodiversity. So if your question is, can we continue like this? No, we can't. Can we decarbonize agriculture? Yes, we can. And we certainly don't need until 2050 to do that, frankly. But can we also solve the problem of living within planetary boundaries as far as biodiversity is concerned? There, I'm a bit more worried. If we cannot adopt the latest technologies, if we cannot continue to introduce that in all parts of agriculture worldwide, if we cannot bring broadband to rural areas, if we can't do all of that, then it's going to be very, very difficult. But not so much a carbon footprint, but I would say certainly the issue of biodiversity.
Agnes, where do you see the biggest obstacles to really delivering on food system renewal right now?
So part of it is what you're saying with regards to you know, what the world is already comfortable doing. So there are ways of doing business that we have adopted as a world, and we, you know, for some reason there are parts of the world which just don't want to see beyond that. And that is definitely going to pose a major challenge, but there are opportunities in that, and maybe we need to focus on the opportunities of shifting a food system rather than the opportunities of staying and being comfortable in what we do, even when we know that what we do is definitely not the right thing to be doing. So for example, there's in any particular production system out there, especially the ones that are huge, I mean, the amount of waste is unbelievable. It's already contributing 8% to emissions. Do we really need to be having that level of waste in our food systems? Then there are other ways of thinking about. A lot of these production systems are geared towards, you know, a certain form of trade or ways of engaging around trade. Trade is extremely important. Don't get me wrong. We will continue doing trade, but we also need to think about the UK government talks about just transitions. We need to think about just transitions in different systems, mostly because those type of transitions are not only important and just for people, but because they are just for our environment. And some of those transitions, whether we like it or not, we are going to have to face them. So for me, it's really focusing and understanding the business opportunities that are being offered across the board in different perspectives of the Food System Summit and what it will take for us to get there, rather than to be comfortable with what we do. In terms of production, for example, here in Africa, sustainable intensification is one of the things we've been talking about. What is sustainable intensification? Today, if you don't think about some form of intensification, the only way you get to produce food in Africa is you cut another tree, you cut another forest, right? And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that people are producing within limited boundaries, but also we don't want to make sure that we want to make sure that people are not suffering from lack of food. So there are ways we can combine what we already know with technologies that are coming on board and what we already have. And the Vice President talked a lot about technologies. The opportunity here is in technology. The opportunity here is in innovation, and the opportunity here is in being creative and open-minded. There are definitely opportunities for investments that would take our food system to a better place. Definitely, I definitely do think that we can find those for the US government, and I'm glad that the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Agriculture is committing and really prepared to commit towards this. And I'm very sure they'll find ways of going around the system they have now to future food systems.
All right, well, that's a great upbeat thought, Agnes, thank you. Frans, I'm going to leave the last word, and it's going to have to be quite a brief word on this discussion, to you. I mean, there you sit in Brussels, Vice President of the Commission. In recent years, let us be honest, we've seen geopolitics dominated by sort of nationalistic, protectionist sentiment. We've seen it in the United States, we've seen it in China, and we've seen it, let's be honest, in certain aspects of EU strategy as well. Can you be confident that right now we're entering a different phase and that this Food Systems Summit can be the start of something which is more genuinely, internationally collaborative and cooperative? And because if it isn't, it's just not going to be meaningful. It's not going to work, is it?
Absolutely. And I think we need to heighten the sense of urgency. And politicians don't like to do that because you don't want, before long, you'll be accused of Project Fear again. But let me be as clear as I can be. If we don't change, our children will be fighting wars over water and over food. I have no doubt whatsoever about that. So I don't want to sound dystopian. This is simply the truth. Let's follow the science. So that's why we need to change, and we need to change now.
Great. Wow.
I wish to say that as well. We must change now.
Yeah. Well, you both ended on time, which in itself is a feat and remarkable. So I thank you for that. But you've also given a real clarion call to all of us to take seriously the issues facing our food systems, our agriculture. And I think, Agnes, having heard from you, we really look forward to the Food Systems Summit later this year. So thank you to you, Agnes. Frans Timmermans, thank you to you as well. We really appreciate you both taking the time out to join the Forum on the Future of Agriculture this year. Thank you both. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was, I think, a really powerful way of ending this discussion about the different challenges facing all of us as we consider this theme of renewing agriculture, renewing food systems around the world to make them both more efficient, more sustainable, and capable of feeding an ever-growing world population. It's a massive set of challenges, but we've heard some really inspiring stuff today about how those challenges might be met.